Astonishing Legends Network.
Listen to the Astonishing Junk Drawer exclusively at patreon.com/astonishinglegends. I've lost all track of what day of the week it is.
We're still talking about movies, I'm sorry.
The Earth is going to be fine. They call it the elephant's foot.
Michelle said you're hanging on by a thread, so might as well take that vodka shot.
If Prince had crawled out of his grave, I don't think he could have gotten into the live show.
If you want to roam the earth in that, have at it.
That's weird.
Wait, you didn't end the stream.
I'm ending it now. I don't know why we
see.
don't go away at the end of that. It should
We should. I think we're supposed to. Are people
maybe
still
I'm
hanging
supposed to
out?
make us go away ahead of time. No, now we're going. Bye, everybody.
Good night.
Tonight's episode contains discussions of adult themes as related to historical research connected to Russian mystic Rasputin, including sensitive topics such as rape and sexual practices. Listener discretion is strongly advised. The content may not be suitable for all audiences, and we encourage listeners to exercise caution when listening.
Astonishing Legends would like to thank Smalls, Factor, our contributors at patreon.com, and you, our listeners, for making tonight's show possible.
Tonight, Astonishing Legends welcomes a master storyteller, podcasting legend, and comedian with an extensive archive of episodes that border on the supernatural. Dan Cummins, creator of the wildly popular podcasts Timesuck and Scared to Death. Dan's show Timesuck delves into historical figures and mysteries with the meticulous attention of a scholar and the disposition of a seasoned stand-up comedian. We have long been fans of his shows, not only for how well they are produced, but because his research rivals ours in depth. We'll be discussing a wide variety of topics tonight, from Dan's paranormal experiences over the years to the puzzling legend of the mad monk Rasputin. Dan has covered Rasputin in the past, and the depth of his knowledge about him underscores his lasting psychological influence and power. We're also going to examine some unsettling similarities between one of Dan's own unexplained experiences and something that happened to Scott a few years ago. The coincidences are too odd to ignore. Dan's prolific output, 2 weekly podcasts plus bonus content, demonstrates his strong work ethic and passion for the same kinds of topics we love here on our show. We'll discuss his unique approach to storytelling and the unexpected path that led him to podcasting. Additionally, Scott will share an anecdote from his recent tour of the infamous Rhine Institute in Durham, North Carolina, where he learned about a recent scientific study on human bioluminescence.
Welcome back to Astonishing Legends. I'm Scott Philbrook, and this is Dan Cummins.
I've had a little thing happen now, and weirdly, it started right when I started Scared to Death, and it was just a taste, and I'm like, I know that was paranormal.
Join us tonight for an in-depth discussion with Dan Cummins on, well, a lot of stuff.
And we're back.
That we are, folks, and I would like to dedicate tonight's show to an amazing woman in my life who was a take-no-prisoners, cynical, witty, and hilarious matriarch in every sense of the word, my grandmother, Betty Brinkley. She passed away peacefully yesterday as we record this, on March 18th, 2025, at the age of 96, and I'm just so grateful that my entire family got a chance to visit with her before she transitioned. It's an odd thing to be in the world without one of those folks that was here before me.
Yeah, I know. It's never easy to lose a family institution like that, especially one that's been around and had such an impact on everybody. And I know you loved her dearly. And it was a storied family, her and her husband, right? Her husband was related to newscaster David Brinkley. I'm not sure many people remember who he was, but he was talking about an institution in the news.
Yeah, David Brinkley was my grandfather, her husband, my grandfather's father's brother.
Wow.
Yeah, he was like an old school newscaster. A lot of people will not have heard of him, but he was one of the first guys out there out of North Carolina, which is interesting because Edward R. Murrow is also from North Carolina. So we got two like pretty serious news guys from North Carolina back in the day.
I know. Well, I've heard all the family stories, and my heart goes out to you and your family for the loss. But also, they leave a tremendous legacy because even the attendants at her care facility called her this. What were their nicknames for her and her husband?
She was known as the queen.
Right.
My grandfather was known as the king by the whole family. That's what they called them.
And
for
why?
Decades.
Because they were just such magnificent presences.
It's honestly, I feel like I've told this on the show before. I don't think I have, maybe, but it's all because it's me, actually. I came up with it, which is, it's a huge family now. There's all kinds of grandkids and great grandkids and lots of people. But back in the day, I was the only grandson. I was the first one. And my grandfather was a banker. He was like a vice president at a bank, and he did commercial loans. And my mom had gone back to college, and I would stay at their house after school until she got out of college classes that she was taking. She was studying to be a CPA. And one day he came home, he drove this big Lincoln Continental, and they had like a kind of a nice house in Raleigh, North Carolina. And I was, there waiting, and he came in the door and I said, "The king is home." Oh. And then like he became the king from then until he passed away. Yeah. And he died a while back, and she became the queen, but they very much embodied those personalities. And for other folks who are older, and you'd have to be older still, but you can probably look on YouTube and find her. There was a sitcom way back in the day in the 70s called Maude, then there's Maude, I think, or just Maude.
B. Arthur.
Maybe the theme song is Then There's Maude. Yeah, B. Arthur. That was my grandmother's personality to a T. My wife, who was a comedy writer, even said that my grandmother was funnier than B. Arthur. But yes, the same vibe. So yeah, she will be sorely missed.
Well, sorely missed, but always remembered. So you can't ask for much more than that.
Absolutely. All right, folks, tonight's show was a blast. It came at the right time for me. I'm so glad we finally got a chance to sit down and really hang out with Dan. And folks, we're damn near certain you're going to enjoy this episode. So when it's done, find and subscribe to his shows, Timesuck, and the one he does with his better half, Lindsay, Scared to Death. Both are excellent.
Oh, they are. You know what? If you love some spicy, peppery, salty humor with your laundry list of facts that we deliver without all the humor, check out those shows because they're a lot of fun, each in their own different way. So they both bring a lot to the table.
And one of the things that we found out from talking to him, and you'll hear this tonight, is that he is a very disciplined individual.
Oh, yeah.
And he is very focused on his research and getting things right and going deep. And that's one of the things because, we had told him that we'd wanted to talk a little bit about Rasputin. We were thinking about doing a show on him down the road. But honestly, when I heard Dan's coverage of it, which was an episode he did back in 2017, I was like, wow. I mean, this guy, my God, he really, really covered it. He dug up a lot of great information and conveyed it in a really great way with a great narrative structure. So he's just a top flight podcaster in this field, and it's in the same genre as us. In a lot of ways, they do things that we don't do, but and also he's a stand-up, so he's hilarious, and which we're not. So there you go.
No, I was going to say people don't get the wrong impression. Yes, there is a lot of irreverence and humor directed towards the goofy, crazy characters throughout history or on his subjects and the topics he covers, but he's very reverent to the facts and the information. And
that's right.
It's very well researched.
A trustworthy source.
He's also very concise, which we've never managed to do with the same amount of information.
We're getting better at it. We're getting better. 10 years in, we're getting better at it.
Yeah, but they're both very entertaining, so go check them out.
All right, Sarah, let's roll our discussion with Dan Cummins. We would like to welcome a longtime podcaster who honestly is better at it than we are to the show. And you may have heard of him because his name is Dan Cummins and his show is called Timesuck. It's been around a long time. That's one of his shows. He's actually got another show now with his wife, which is Scared to Death, right, Dan?
Yeah.
So welcome to Astonishing Legends. Thank you for coming on.
Well, thank you. You set the bar too high. Anyone who listens like, he's better? Nope. They will immediately be disappointed. But thank you.
I disagree. It's funny because we've been in touch over the years. We did some cross promos several years ago.
I was on Scared to Death, I believe.
Oh, that's right. That's right. You were, weren't you, Forrest?
Mm-hmm.
When did you go on? What did you talk about when you went on?
Oh, boy.
Year one, maybe, or year two at the most.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it just started. What you'll find and listeners will find is, a lot of these folks, especially within the genre, kind of have heard of each other. And, not only are there, you're going to be fast friends and they're listeners. They've heard your show. I've heard their show. But the premise sounds like a lot of fun just to be on. So obviously, agreed to come on. And it was a blast.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, I remember I reached out to you guys. What first caught my eye, as I was looking into like paranormal shows, I kept seeing your guys' logo pop up, and it is one of my favorite logos of just any show of any kind.
Oh, wow, thanks.
Oh, it's so good. It's so, and I still like, I mean, I see it on Forrest Hat, you know, I'm like, I'm jealous. You know, I'm happy with ours, but it's not that. It's like, it's perfect. Yeah.
It's wild. I don't know how. We've just finished our 305th show.
Yeah, you're on over 400, I think, at this point.
What in the world, man? How often are you putting out Timesucks? Is it weekly?
It's weekly. So
year-round weekly?
Year-round, 52 weeks a year, yeah.
How do you do that?
My wife would say, like, I've pushed it to the edge of a nervous breakdown on several occasions.
Well, we're glad to know there's a limit, because it would
Yeah.
seem impossible. But first of all, Dan's in better shape. Also, we're going to talk about him being a stand-up comedian and that performance gene, as we called it, and that kind of energy that it takes to do that. And also, one thing I love about not only a stand-up, but the podcast he does, is there's full of energy. It just comes across. There's never a dull moment. You're laughing throughout and learning a little something. And just that amount of energy, it's like, okay, this guy is a different breed than Scott and I. It's, it's like Scott and I we just read 8 articles and we're exhausted. Taking notes from it.
You know, it's funny, like socially, I get exhausted pretty fast. Like if I go to like a little gathering, I can only kind of handle so much of that before I'm pretty tired. But like when it comes to information, my wife would say, I've never been tested, but she is certain that I'm fairly autistic. Mm-hmm. And when it comes to like research and stuff, I basically won't get out of my seat until I just have to, because I have to go to the bathroom so bad.
Yeah.
Or my blood sugar is all wonky because I haven't eaten in a while. But like, I love to just absorb information. I'm just fascinated by it.
Yeah.
And I was so thankful that I found an audience for people who wanted to hear that information regurgitated.
Yes.
Because a lot of the comedic podcasts where it's just a conversation, I mean, I get it. There's a place for that, but I get pretty bored with that pretty fast.
Right.
You know, just talking about the same kind of stand-up-y things. I would much rather talk about, well, like we talked about before we started hitting record, Rasputin, some just historical weirdo.
Yes.
I could lose days happily just being like, what? Are you serious?
Well, and that shows in your episode on him. It's like one of the most thorough historical episode, because there's so much, and when we tackle topics like that, and you can get really in the weeds on, like, it's almost you got to walk the line between this academic history lesson and then the weirdness and the parts that that you're real. And that guy, what a freak, by the way. And you made a joke in your episode on him, which I thought was funny. Where like, sometimes people say that about my eyes because my eyes are really kind of. And I went and looked at like a publicity shot of you on the internet, and I was like, I think you two might be related. You and
no, folks, he doesn't.
I can look cool to you for sure.
Very handsome man. Doesn't look anything like that as we're seeing him.
No,
now.
He's a better.
I got my glasses. I got my glasses, but no, my even my daughter, my teenage daughter, we were having dinner a while back, and I have tattoos and things, and and I'm sometimes bigger than people expect when they've seen me online. And she just said out of nowhere, she's like, if I didn't know you, she's like, just looking at you, I'd be scared. And I was like, and I'm I think a pretty gentle, nice guy, but it's like, it is funny. Like, I've gotten the Rasputin or comparison or like cult leader when we've covered cults in the past. They're like, that you definitely look like a cult leader, right?
Right. You could pull this off. Yeah.
It's the eyes.
I think they're conflating that though with your personality, and like I said, it's a lot of charisma coming through. You don't look scary to us at all.
Okay, good.
Because here's the thing: is that what you do, not everybody in the audio space could do, and that is stand up. It's one of the most scary things on earth is to stand up in front of an audience and tell jokes.
Yeah, that is terrifying.
And just the fear of bombing and the reaction, and when it works, there's a high to it. I mean, I've been on stage a little bit, and it's exhilarating, but just being on camera when you just have crew people there, that is terrifying, exhausting, and there's a lot to it that people who've not done it don't realize that what it takes.
Yeah, when did you start doing stand up, Dan?
I started doing stand up back in 2000.
Okay,
shortly after, like a year after college. And it's interesting. I was just talking to somebody about this the other day, but I'm one of the few stand-ups who never really cared that much about stand-up. Yeah. I wanted to do something creative. I was actually more into music at that time, but I had a little band in college and, was frustrated that they weren't as invested in it as I was, and that I didn't want to have to restart. And I just thought, well, what's something I can do where I don't have to depend on others and don't have to worry about them flaking out, but it allows me, a lot of creativity, immediate feedback, which was nice about stand-up. And so, I just got into it then. And really over the years, I've learned what I really like is just storytelling. And actually what I like about podcasting compared to stand-up is my problem with stand-up has always been, as soon as I get a story or a joke to work, I lose all interest in repeating it.
Oh, right. Yeah.
I like the creation process. I like the puzzle solving aspect of figuring out how to make this story funny for strangers.
Uh-huh.
But then once I've done that, I'm like, okay, I want to do that. I'm bored. Let's do the next thing.
I'm not a comedian, but I can relate to that in terms of projects. Like, it's over the years, whenever I would try to take something on, and Forrest and I have talked about this, we even were involved in something, I guess 20 years now ago, that was the same kind of thing. It's like, I want to crack the nut. And then once it's cracked, I'm kind of like, I get a wandering eye or whatever.
Yeah.
This is probably Astonishing Legends is the longest I've stuck with anything, really. I used to be an editor, a TV commercial editor and stuff like that. I was in that gig for 17 years. So I got to do 7 more years here before I'll surpass what I thought of as my career for the first half of my life, you know?
Yeah. But probably with this is podcasting is constantly evolving and changing.
Yes. Yeah.
And within the paranormal world, there are so many different things to look at, so many types of stories. It's nice that way, where for a creative person or somebody who gets easily bored, I think it does a good job of like holding our attention.
So, how long's it been since, let's say, you got an extra item with your order at the drive-thru?
Yeah. A few months ago, we found a tiny abandoned kitten in a fast food drive-thru. He was just sitting there. He was dirty, starving, but incredibly sweet. Just sitting in a little loaf on the ground right next to where all the cars go through. And the girl there taking orders. And we were there for breakfast, me and my son. So we felt like we had to rescue him. They clearly said they couldn't take him inside because it was a restaurant.
Right.
We picked him up, brought him into the car. We named him Biscuit. And he's become the goofiest, most fearless member of the family. He's an absolute delight to have around. And getting him healthy was a priority. And that's where Smalls Food came in. It's a twist of fate, actually, that they sponsored us right after we found Biscuit.
Yeah.
We didn't know what he'd been eating. He was very thin, and we were particularly concerned about getting him as healthy as possible, as quickly as possible. And I'll tell you this, he absolutely prefers the Smalls Food. Because when we got him, we had been having him on another brand of canned food.
Yeah.
And a lot of times he would leave a bunch of that in the can. He would eat like a third of it. But the Smalls, he finished everything. And now he looks like $1 million. In fact, I posted him to our Insta recently. He looks like a new cat. There's a picture of him when I first got him. And now he's twice as big as he was a few months ago with a beautiful butterscotch coat.
Oh, that's so sweet. Well, I'm glad for your sake he didn't turn into the Tasmanian devil. Well, look, seriously, I know how you and your family treat your pets. You make sure they have the best of everything, especially what you feed them.
Yep, just like any family member, you try to give your kids the best food you can, right? Well, the same goes for our kitty. And if you feel the same way, you gotta try Smalls. Smalls is top shelf, gourmet level nutrition. These are protein-packed recipes with ingredients that are preservative-free, same food you'd find in your fridge, and Smalls is delivered right to your door.
Yeah, I think your cat eats better than I do. But seriously, that's why Smalls got the rating of best overall cat food from cats.com. And that's saying something. And now we're offering a terrific deal so you and your cat can see why. 50% off your first order plus free shipping when you head over to smalls.com and use our promo code AL.
Cats don't care how well their food is marketed to their owners. They vote with one thing, their stomach.
That's
and
true.
A Biscuit loves Smalls, like I said. And I got to tell you, the food that he wasn't eating was an expensive old wet food from a ginormous brand that you've heard of. He stopped eating it altogether when he found out he could get Smalls, his favorite flavor, smooth fish.
The team at Smalls is so confident your cat will love their product that you can try it risk-free. And that means they will refund you if your cat won't eat their food. And I love the grassroots origin story of Smalls. A couple of guys were cooking cat food in small batches at home for their friends back in 2017. Since then, they've served millions of meals to cats across the U.S.
Yeah, and I know some people prefer to feed their cats kibble, but it's not the best overall choice for them. Even if they love kibble, you can use Smalls as a topper to transition them to a new, healthier, fresh diet. I mean, Biscuit is still a kitten, but Smalls must be doing something right because he's got a ton of energy. He loves to play pretty much all day long. I feel like he takes maybe 4 10-minute naps. The rest of the time, he's going a million miles.
Well, that sounds like me, except without all the energy there. Well, okay, so what's wrong with kibble, you ask? Well, if you're an AL listener, you probably know that the modern house cat descended from the African wildcat, maybe around 7,500 to 10,000 years ago. But what hasn't changed is that your kitty still needs the fresh,
protein-packed meals they used to hunt for to feel their best, which is what nature intended.
Other cat food brands choose profit over fresh proteins because they fill their food with mysterious meat byproducts, artificial flavoring, and preservatives. After switching to Smalls, 88% of cat owners reported overall health improvements. That's a big deal.
Oh, you bet it is. So what are you waiting for? Give your cat the food they deserve.
Head to smalls.com and use promo code AL at checkout for 50% off your first order, plus free shipping.
That's the best offer you'll find, but you have to use our code AL for 50% off your first order.
One last time, that's promo code AL for 50% off your first order, plus free shipping. Are you ready to optimize your nutrition this year?
You talking to me? Why? Do I look malnourished? Don't answer that. If anything, I probably look overnourished. But you're right. Anytime is a great time to optimize one's nutrition, and I'm personally always ready for delicious food that's easy and convenient.
Well, then, man, have I got a delicious and nutritious solution for you, my friend. And for everyone else who's looking for dietitian-approved, chef-made gourmet meals that make eating well easy, and that's Factor.
Ah, yes, Factor. Well, Factor is super convenient because it arrives fresh and fully prepared and ready to heat and eat in about 2 minutes. Perfect for any active, busy lifestyle. Or maybe you just want a tasty meal that's fast, but not fast food, so you can fuel up and feel great, no matter what the day holds.
Yeah, and I know a lot of people are on a keto diet or thinking of trying it. Well, check this out. You could lose up to 8 pounds in 8 weeks with Factor Keto meals, based on a randomized controlled clinical trial with Factor Keto. Results will vary depending on diet and exercise.
And you got a lot of other options with Factor. With 40 options across 8 dietary preferences on the menu each week, it's easy to pick meals tailored to your goals. Choose from preferences like Calorie Smart and Protein Plus, in addition to keto.
Yeah, and it's not just lunch or dinner options because Factor can help you feel your best all day long with wholesome smoothies, breakfasts, grab-and-go snacks, and more add-ons.
Well, reach your goals this year with ingredients you can trust and convenience that can't be beat.
Yeah, I love the smoothies too. I am also a huge fan of their Protein Plus options because I've always been kind of a meat and potatoes guy, but I like gourmet meals too, and I want a manageable meal that's delicious, but also with reasonable portions that aren't absurdly huge, leaving me feeling like a water balloon when I get done eating.
Right.
So that's why I like the Factor Protein Plus menu. I get a good protein and a healthy and delicious meal that was created by registered dietitians and prepared by gourmet chefs. It's pretty great. And I'm overeating less. In fact, I love the garlic cream pork chop, which I just had. It's only 650 kilocalories, and it tastes magnificent. The pork chop is wonderful. It's brined in apple cider vinegar and then grilled and topped with this super tasty garlic cream sauce on it and a nice side of zucchini pepper onion medley that I think must be sauteed. It is so good. And this one is also on their keto diet, by the way. So you could do that too if you're doing that one. But this kind of meal really helps me reach my personal goal of portion control while getting to eat outstanding gourmet meals.
Well, congratulations on reaching your goals in such a delicious and easy way. Eat smart with Factor. Get started at factormeals.com/factorpodcast, all one word, and use code factorpodcast to get 50% off your first box plus free shipping.
That's code factorpodcast at factormeals.com/factorpodcast to get 50% off plus free shipping on your first box.
Hi, I'm Jenna, and you're listening to Astonishing Legends with Scott Philbrook and Forrest Burgess. Now back to the show.
Here's it's a personal question. I should have asked you this one off the air, but like if you're doing a weekly show, how often do you guys put out Scared? How often does that go out?
We do that one every week as well.
You have 2 52-week year-round weekly shows.
Yeah, and then we do bonus episodes on Patreon for Scared to Death, and then I started doing 2 short sucks a month last year on Timesuck.
Oh, right, that's right.
So
yeah,
every other week I do one of those, and then every other week on Scared to Death, now I do these Nightmare Fuel stories, which are fictional stories. Every time it's like a joke with my wife. I paused stand-up, took some time off the road, and the point was to recharge, which I did, but like recharge and do less. I think 2 weeks after I stopped touring, I immediately launched these other series.
Yeah.
And she's like, why? Why do you do that to yourself? Right.
Oh my God. Does she have a day job or another gig too? Or it's just all, you just working on y'all's stuff?
When we left LA, we met in LA. And we moved to Coeur d'Alene, Idaho to be closer to the kids. I have 2 kids with my ex-wife. They were coming down and back and forth all the time. Didn't want to split them up when my son wanted to live with us. So we just thought, okay, my ex is not going to move to LA. We need to move back to where she is and move up here. My current wife, Lindsay, was in the production space in film and TV. She was in the costume department.
What kind of stuff did she work on?
She worked on like Supergirl, Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D.,
cool.
Weeds, a bunch of shows over the years, mostly TV, mostly in the studio lots. And she primarily worked as a costumer or as a shopper.
Okay.
She would go, get the outfits for everybody to wear. So when she moved up here, she was going to go into realty and be a realtor.
Yeah.
And about a year into her doing that, things started to pick up on Timesuck. And we were at that weird point where we were gaining a lot of traction as far as listeners at that time. It was a newer show. It was building, getting more emails from fans, more engagement, more demand for content. I was trying to keep up with that, but we weren't monetizing a lot of it yet.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we had more work than I could handle. I was getting real fried and felt like I was going to collapse. And so we had this decision. We couldn't afford to pay someone to do what she could do, but she could do it. And she took a leap of faith and left realty and came over here, and she's been doing that for 6-7 years now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. That's amazing.
But when you first started, let's wind this back. Like, what got you interested in that? Any formative experiences when you were young?
I would say like on the paranormal side, I mean, Timesuck's kind of all over the place, but with like Scared to Death Paranormal, the first author I fell in love with, I grew up in this tiny town. I'm old enough and it was remote enough that when I was a kid, you had the 3 channels. You had like airwaves. You had like NBC, CBS, ABC. I mean, very, very little to watch, but we did have a library. And this little library, and my grandma, who I spent a lot of time with my grandparents growing up, like their house was more of the main house as opposed to like my mom's house. And my grandma was always reading. I started reading young, she was, got me reading young. And I don't even remember exactly what drew me to horror, but I saw something, like the way it made me feel or whatever. And the first author I started reading was Stephen King, which is probably not a normal choice for a little kid. But I was fascinated. I remember being so into it. I wanted to move to Maine. I wish I could have lived there. I thought these towns were real. And then that led to my stepdad, a couple years later, got this huge satellite, like early satellite TV days. It looked like something from NASA. I mean,
those dishes, I had friends with those in high school.
Huge.
Nuts. Yeah. And plus they have motors on them. You got to tune them to different satellites. Yeah,
and you just grind along on this massive concrete block.
Yeah.
And there was this thing going around when I was probably 10 or 11. My stepdad got it. They just called it the Black Box Descrambler.
Yes.
Yep.
Totally illegal. I don't know who sold these things. I still don't understand to this day how they did this, but you would just get it. And it gave you literally every channel for free.
Yes. Yep.
And so suddenly they just had all the channels, and I had a little TV in my room after that was, again, like no one would have this now. We called it like a satellite TV, where it only showed, it was hooked up to the main TV. So I had to watch whatever anybody else was watching.
Whatever they were watching. Yes. Yep. Yeah.
But because nobody else had something like this in my friends group in our town, I became like the go-to sleepover place.
Yeah.
And because we had all the channels, once my mom and stepdad fell asleep, we could watch anything. I mean, we could watch anything from Penthouse to cinema. But what we started to fall in love with was these Cinemax, HBO and stuff at that time, late on Friday night, late on Saturday. Skinemax, totally Skinemax.
That's what we used to call it.
Yeah, us too.
Yeah.
And Showtime and all that, but they would play horror movies all the time. And that was the go-to for years, was to watch all these horror movies. And so well before comedy, I was much more in love with horror.
Oh, interesting.
And even when I got into comedy, and specifically supernatural horror has always been my favorite.
Mm-hmm.
And then once, even I got into comedy, if I was going to watch a movie, it was never a comedy. It was always, something in usually like the paranormal horror or sci-fi space.
Oh, very
And so
cool.
it was always kind of there in the background, a fascination with this world. And then once Timesuck got going, and Timesuck, I launched that out of, honestly, 100% desperation. My stand-up career I had a good reputation in the clubs for being funny, but I could not sell a ticket to save my life. I'd done some of the late night. It didn't help translate to an audience. And then once you kind of do those shows, unless you become a favorite, they just move on to the next person, which I get.
Yeah.
So it's kind of on the outs. We had decided to move up to Coeur d'Alene, and I honestly thought like my career was probably over. And so I took this Hail Mary on like, okay, I'll try a podcast. but I don't want to do, I had tried a few in the past and I was sick of agents and managers telling me, oh, you should do this. Oh, you should do that. It never worked. None of what they suggested resonated with me. So I'm like, well, this is going to be my last thing. At least I should like it.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, I like these weird topics. I like exploring deep dives. That's what I procrastinate and do when I'm supposed to be working on a script or something. And instead I'm learning about like the O.J. Simpson trial randomly 10 years, like something random.
Yeah.
And I just thought, well, maybe people will like it, and threw it out there as a Hail Mary. It worked. And then I started to try to do paranormal topics on that show, but it was too analytical, too critical. And I felt like I was taking all the fun out of it. And I was like, this isn't the right vehicle for that. And that led to Scared to Death, where I was like, my wife is a very expressive person, great to watch a horror movie with, because she's one of those people that'll cover her eyes and scream. And I just thought, well, what if I told these stories to her and didn't critique them? Here is what someone claims has happened, period.
Right.
I wasn't there. I don't know what's true. And I also am going to see if I can tell it to her, and if I can scare her and she's having kind of fun in that scared way, maybe other people listening will feel the same. And that's how it became a thing.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's great. Well, so it's very organic.
Yeah.
So nothing really odd happened to you. It's more of just a general like for the genre. Nothing really set you
I wanted
off.
something. I
You
wanted something to
else.
happen.
That's the other camp.
Yeah, I used to want that until it happened.
Oh, really? Yeah, I am on the edge. I've had a little thing happen now, and weirdly, it started right when I started Scared to Death.
Yeah.
And it was just a taste. And I'm like, I know that was paranormal. There's no other.
What was that? What happened?
It's not the most exciting thing.
Yeah.
But it was at the Rainbow Tavern on the Sunset Strip in LA.
Yeah.
I was doing a show at the Comedy Store, but we were living here now. So it was my wife, Lindsay, my agent, Joe. We were meeting at the Rainbow Room or whatever, Rainbow Tavern, to have, a meal before the show. So we met kind of early, like 5 o'clock. It was like on a Thursday, pretty dead. For anyone who's not been there, it's kind of this old school, like Italian steakhouse kind of vibe, the pleated leather, the booths, dark.
In the evenings filled with 80s hair farmer rockers.
Yeah.
So it's a last bastion for the hair bands like Rat and Motley Crue and that kind of, and then people who are even younger are still showing up to wallow in that
Well, it's
vibe.
got a cool feel. It's got a cool feel.
It does. No, it's very
Lemmy
historic.
from Motorhead's got his own stool there. Yeah.
Yep.
I mean, God rest his soul. But
Totally.
I went and sat on that stool last time I went. So
that's awesome. Yeah, I'd never been. Yeah. And so, it's like the ground floor is like the restaurant. Then you go up one level, there's a bar and a little performance space. And then I think there's even a third level with a tiny performance space up there.
It'd been known as the Vampire Lounge.
Oh, that's right.
You get little special access. And basically, I think there's you go up there and there's a tiny bar. And it's often not staffed. So, but you can just go up there and chill out. And it's a little quieter, and you can look down and see the other performance space. And I think they have TVs where you can watch stuff. But basically, it's just people. One of those places that you wander into. You have a few sips and then you go someplace else.
You can look down at the police on the next floor down. Yeah.
Well, when we went there, the second floor was not staffed. The third floor, definitely not staffed. It's pretty dead. We're waiting for Joe to arrive. My wife, Lindsay, and I were sitting there in the booth, and it was pretty lightly, there wasn't that many other people there. And eventually I have to go to the bathroom. So I'm like, hey, I'm going to go to the bathroom. Where is it? It's the second floor. On my way up to the second floor, first little weird thing, but fairly common for me in LA. There was this guy and this lady coming down, and they just had a very strange energy, but like especially strange.
Mm-hmm.
And the way he was looking at me, I'm like, I don't know, just kind of gave me the chills, and I couldn't figure out why. I'm like, well, that's weird, but let go of it. I go and use the bathroom, and the bathroom on the second floor, when you walk in, there is one stall to your left, and I think like 2 urinals straight ahead. It's a very small bathroom. And I walk in, and there's a sink to wash your hands right when you walk in. I would have noticed if it was on because I'm a anal person that way. I would have turned it off.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I go, I'm using the urinal. All of a sudden I notice the sink is on full blast, and not only full blast, but it's so hot, steam is coming out of the sink. And I remember specifically thinking, why would they do that? That's a lawsuit waiting to happen.
Right.
Yeah.
Like, why would they allow it to ever get that hot? Someone's going to burn themselves and sue them. So I'm thinking that. It also just kind of feels weird in there. Finish using the bathroom. I turn the hot water off, put the cold on, wash my hands, put the hot so it's warm, whatever. And then I'm like, man, that's crazy that it was able to get that hot. And I wanted to recreate it. So I turned just the hot water on, let it ride for about, 30 seconds, doesn't get close to that hot. And I'm like, that is really, really weird.
Yeah.
And I still feel weird. So I walk downstairs, sit back at the booth, and then the waitress comes over and I have this one and only time I've ever said this. I go, excuse me, I've never asked anybody the question like this before, but is this place haunted? And she goes, oh yeah. And then she had to walk off to deal with somebody else. I'm like, okay, that's weird.
Of course. Yeah.
Well, then she comes back and I'm like, and then she's like, so what were you saying? And I was like, okay, I just had the weirdest experience. I told her, I go, I'm upstairs using the bathroom. And then she cuts me off and she goes, let me guess. The hot water turned on all by itself. And I just got the chills and I'm like, yes. And she goes, you've met one of our ghosts.
Wow.
Ooh.
And I have racked my brain in the years since thinking, how can you explain that?
Yeah.
Other than the paranormal. And so, one person said, they're like, oh, well, it could have been someone downstairs and they turned it on for, and I'm like, how does somebody turn on the hot water upstairs from downstairs without changing, the actual handle?
Yeah, that's a valve. That's a mechanical
and to
valve.
get it that
Makes
hot,
no sense.
like he said, right? They are cognizant of that, most establishments, and they know not to turn it on that hot where, you could get burned and then you get sued and then,
Totally.
I've been in that bathroom because
funny.
I've been to the place many times back in the day, mid 90s, early 2000s, and every place, well, as you probably know, Dan, from doing all your tours there, LA's comedy clubs especially are notoriously haunted, and they give tours.
Yeah, a lot on the Strip.
Right.
Places on the Strip are
Comedy
haunted.
stores.
Comedy store. They're all in the sense that Strip has a long history. The Whiskey A Go-Go. They're all very storied, lots of energy, lots of tragic stories, and right. And so they're all haunted. And in fact, every place I go into, usually there's a vibe, and then sometimes if there's not, you just ask, and it's like, oh yeah, strange stuff happens.
Yeah.
But generally, if you feel like, is this place haunted? The answer is yes.
Yeah.
And so, especially in that place, which is also dark and kind of vampire-y and kind of creepy, and you could just, the place just oozes, that kind of vibe. And so I would expect that. But it's interesting, though, that you had the encounter with there's a lot of strange people that frequent it, especially back in the days when I would go there occasionally, and usually they're nice and they're kind of comical, but you've done so much traveling that when you meet somebody like that, it has an impression on you. That has more weight.
What did the guy look like? Or the couple look like?
They were attractive, very LA looking, like probably, late 40s, very fit. And it just seemed the way he looked and smiled, I don't know, just a dark energy.
You got a feeling.
Yeah. Just like
Devil in the Diner.
We have an episode called Devil in the Diner. One of our it's actually the first interview we ever recorded. It wound up being like the 7th or 8th episode.
Yeah. With
a friend of my wife's, she's a comedy writer, and her friend is Paula Pell, who I don't know if you know who she was on Girls Five Eva and SNL forever.
Oh wow,
whatever, genius. But this was when she was working at Saturday Night Live in New York, and she and her friend at like 2 or 3 in the morning saw somebody in a diner that freaked them both out.
Yeah.
And they described almost exactly what you're talking about with this person coming down the stairs. They wound up fleeing the diner.
Oh, wow.
And didn't realize they had been separately freaked out, but hadn't told each other inside the restaurant. When they got out on the street, they both started like going crazy about this guy that was in there.
Yeah.
And so that's really interesting.
And I've had other things like that happen. I've had like unexplained sounds, feelings, maybe shadows, but that was the first one that was so concrete.
Right.
That like mechanically, I couldn't explain it. Like my wife's convinced that there's something in my son's former room in our house. There's always like a weird energy that comes from that space. And actually like when I will work on Scared to Death or work on, stories, sometimes I would work late at night at my house. I can't do it anymore, especially if I'm home alone.
Yeah.
I start looking up in that direction and thinking I'm seeing stuff. And I'm like, okay, all the lights are coming on and I'm done. I'm done for tonight.
This is Danielle Lyons. Thank you for listening to Astonishing Legends. Let's get back to the show.
I believe Scott's story, but he was in that, was it Ruth's Chris?
I had a bathroom story. So this is the weirdest thing, Dan.
Yeah.
I was thinking about this. I'm glad Forrest brought this up because it's weird segue. Like it's very similar story. It's so strange. My wife and I had gone when we were living in Valley Village, and we would sometimes go to the Mortons in Burbank and eat.
Yeah, I've seen that. Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So that, that Mortons, it's like in the bottom of like the Sony Music Building or whatever.
Yeah.
And so we would go over there, and great place to eat, got a cool vibe for being in an office building. And, I've told this story on our main show, but it was years ago. We had both recently lost a very dear friend. We lived in New York almost 10 years. And during that time, or a good portion of it, we had like a little getaway house on the Delaware River in Bucks County.
Nice.
And so we would go there on the weekends or whenever we could get there. It was only about an hour and 10-minute drive. And there was a neighbor out there who we were very close with, who had grown up there, lived there his whole life. Him and his family were like in 3 houses all next to each other.
Yeah.
He was about 10 years older than us. And he would watch after the place when we weren't there.
Yeah.
And then when we were there, he would invite us over with all the locals to his basement bar, and everybody drank and talked. It was just so much fun.
Yeah.
And his name was Don Skiss. You know, he's like a family member. He would like take my son on the snow plow when he was just a baby, and he's out plowing the snow and stuff. Don had passed not too long before that, and we used to joke a lot with him, and he, you know, everybody would be like, you know, taking the piss in that family, but from each other and everything, because he rode Harleys, and he had gotten too old to have a 2-wheeled one, so he got one of those 3-wheeled ones, and then everybody was like, oh, look, it's the ice cream man and all that. So there's a lot of like making fun of each other.
Sure.
I was there at the Mortons that night, and I got up to go to the restroom, and I go into the bathroom. It has 3 sinks, and they're all the Magic Eye sinks, right? The sensors.
Oh, yeah.
Where you put your hands under and the water comes up. And so I walk in, none of them are on. I go, at least I think they're, you know, I'd have to go back and hear my own version of the story, but I'm pretty sure none of them were on when I walked in. And then I went over to the urinal, and I'm peeing, and I looked down, and there's a company, and I think it might be global, I don't know, it's national, whatever, that does the urinal stuff like cakes and whatever. And they make those filters, and it's just the name of the company is Don, D-O-N. Okay. And I probably had a Manhattan myself. Sure. I'm in there, and I'm going to the bathroom, and I looked down, and I saw his name, and I kind of had been thinking about him anyway. And I kind of chuckled, and you know, and maybe made like a offhanded joke inside my head. It's like, look, I'm peeing on your name or whatever, something like that. And then like the faucet comes on. No one else is in the bathroom. And so the urinal and the sinks are on the same wall, but I'm like 20 feet from the...
not even close enough. Yeah.
Yeah, so I come back in, I'm like, well, I'm going to go wash my hands. I'm done. And I come back and the faucet's on, and I got like literally the hair stood up on the back of my neck and my arms and everything. And I was like, and I remember thinking, and I was still kind of laughing. I was like, I'm sorry, you didn't think that was funny, you know, or whatever.
Sure.
And I was like, but you're still thinking, oh, this is a malfunction with the sink and whatever. And I was like, okay, I was like, that's really strange. And then it turned off by itself. It had come on for like 5 seconds, I believe.
Yeah.
And so that was the first faucet of the 3. So I went to the one on the far left, and I like reached under and I started washing my hands. And then the one next to me, the next one came on by itself too.
That's weird too, because I've literally never had that happen. And I've used those kind of faucets in airports.
I was just like
a million times.
And I was like, oh my! I was like, it is you. Of course, now that since we've done the show for so many years, well, I've learned, or at least I've come to this philosophy that you don't always know what you're interacting with. But for me, in my head, it was Don messing with me or saying hello or something like that. But so the first one came on by itself, then it turned off. Then the second one, while I was washing my hands, it came on by itself and also turned off. And then after that, like I finished and dried my hands, I stood back and I went and checked all the sensors, and they were functioning completely normally. There was nothing going on with, I don't know what temperature the water was because I didn't check it. But like,
that's the thing is that generally there's you can't control. It's just a warm,
it's all
warm
pre-programmed.
Setting. Yeah. And, you know, like I said, I believe your story, but people could say like, oh, it's an electronic sensor. Sometimes those malfunction.
I have looked into that though, but
right.
But
Dan's story, it's like you physically, it's a
that's an actual
thing.
valve. Yeah, that's different. But it's like water coming on in the bathroom though. It's weird that those stories are even that similar.
It and everything. Yeah.
Well, it's a common thing. Well, faucets, whatever, ghosts love faucets. That's just they love water, they love plumbing, fixtures, they love turning the water on.
Okay, let's change gears here for a minute. So, Dan, one of the things we wanted to talk to you about tonight was Rasputin, because, I mean, you just did such an amazing job covering him back in 2017 on Timesuck. So much great research, but it ties into what we were just talking about, because this is another one of those people that seems to dominate whatever room he's in, like be the total focal point. People just seemed absolutely obsessed with him, right?
It was crazy the effect he had on people. I will say, so much of that with him also came down to timing, where early 20th century in Russia, and then also like, coming out of the late 19th century, just like spiritualism was huge in America.
Yeah. I mean, and he went whole hog, like after his brother drowned, and then he goes to the monasteries, and like, it's like he really dove into that.
So there's this fascination with the occult. There's a lot of very odd Christian denominations. I want to say like cults, but they weren't necessarily cults. They were just very extreme small denominations called, like one was called, I believe, the Christies.
Yes.
They were very, into like gifts of the spirit, speaking in tongues, this revival type atmosphere where they would have these huge get-togethers, these tent revival type get-togethers where they're spinning around and they're cutting off each other's oxygen. They're literally like choking each other. There was rumors that they would devolve into orgies. It was like this crazy, like ecstatic gathering. And that was a known thing. There was another even more extreme group that I want to look up their names because I forgot, the Scopsies. The Scopsies, this is insane. They believed that genital castration brought you closer to God. And these people removed everything. I mean, like the whole kit and caboodle, not just the boys. But like, and the women would remove their breasts and their genitals in these surgeries that would often be botched. They were not performed by a doctor. They were just performed by another member of this group.
No, thank you.
Yeah, just alcohol for your painkiller. And there's more. So there's all these different groups going around. There is, people like in America looking to the occult, seances, that kind of thing. Faith healing was a big thing, as medicine's not quite advanced. And so he comes out of that. And yes, he got his introduction to religion when he went to this monastery. To me, looking back, it's like, he was such a blatant grifter. He was a notorious womanizer. Yeah. He was a drunk. And before he became the mad monk and wandering around Russia, he had 7 kids with this wife, 4 lived. But, so he has these 4 kids at home, his wife cheating on her all the time. And then he actually went to a monastery because he was accused of stealing a horse, I believe. A horse or a donkey, I think a horse. And it was a sanctuary. So he goes to the monastery to hide so he can't be arrested. And, back then you could die from that kind of conviction. Horse thieves were not tolerated. And then he miraculously finds God, how convenient, while he's hiding from the authorities. He eventually comes back home. I'm a changed man. I'm not a womanizer. Well, no, he's just part of this cult-like offshoot of Christianity where now he's holding revival meetings in the basement that allegedly also devolved into orgies. And his story is so crazy, and it should have just ended there. He should have been a small-time hustler. Yeah. But, he gets this vision. Supposedly, I don't think he got a vision. I think he just saw an opportunity to head, west to go to St. Petersburg to find the Romanov family. Yeah. The Romanovs, they'd had their spiritual advisor die. Before he died, he's like, you will find a new one soon, some kind of vision of like another one's going to take my place and you'll know him when you see him kind of thing. He heard through back channels like this kind of stuff was going on. And he approached the Romanov family through the Crow sisters, I believe, who were relatives. They were very into the occult. So there was all these opportunities for him. But the biggest thing that hooked him in with the Romanovs is their son, Alexei. And I'm pulling this from memory. So I think, but Alexei was a hemophiliac. Yes. He gets a cut on his leg. It's bleeding. The doctors are trying to help it. Well, the doctors back then, they didn't know that aspirin thinned your blood. So they're giving him aspirin. And so he just keeps bleeding. Well, then Rasputin just takes, I think, a shot in the dark. And he's like, I can heal him, but, get away from him. Let me heal him. Well, when he had the doctors get away from him, they stopped giving him aspirin. So his blood isn't as thinned. It is able to clot a little bit. And once the doctors are removed, he stops bleeding, coincides with Rasputin being there. And man, he is in now. And over the next couple years, it was bonkers what he got away with. Yeah. He was sleeping with everybody around the staff. They had the police follow him because, people are suspicious in the Romanov circle. Yes. He would have multiple prostitutes a day that he is taking into bathhouses, extreme stuff. He's whipping them and then having sex with them. He convinces some of the people around the Romanovs that his actual penis is a sacrament. And so he will get people to fillet him thinking they are receiving the sacrament of the second coming of Christ. Oh my God. It just kept getting more and more extreme. Yeah, it was so bonkers.
And wasn't he supposedly having an affair with the Tsar's wife as well?
Yeah, the Tsarina?
Yeah, the Tsarina, yeah.
They think so. So many things are alleged. We'll never know for sure, but very possibly.
Yeah, Alexandra, who was the one who, because out of desperation, we've seen this before, is that when you have a sick child, you'll, at some point when nothing else works, you're so desperate, you'll try anything. And here you have this man who comes with a legend already built in. And the question I'm going to head towards here with you is that since birth, it was reported, or part of his personal legend and how his cult of personality built. He was born when there was a comet in the sky. I think in 3 days. And so you have this auspice in the sky. And as a child, he was described as very strange and standoffish and spooky. And but he was said to have cured farm animals of their illnesses. He was able to eventually cure people. Villagers, neighbors thought he could read their minds.
Yeah.
So then you do wonder, it's like, okay, was there anything there? And
there might be.
So I was going to ask you, do you believe that that kind of thing is possible?
You know, it's so tricky because I think of somebody like really good at like cold reading and how they're able to make people think they're speaking to the dead. I am not opposed at all to that gift being real. And I, in fact, think that some people probably can do that.
Right.
But when you watch a grifter do it.
Yeah, really good.
They can be very good at like doing this cold reading. I think Rasputin probably was very good at those kind of things, like a natural born con man, but also he might have had some kind of weird occult gifts, you know.
Yeah, why can't it be
both?
That's something we say on the show all the time.
Exactly.
Why can't it be multiple things happening at once?
Totally.
Yeah,
you know?
logically, it's all of this or none of this or something in between. And I often kind of believe that.
And he was pretty evil. He was, I think, a pretty evil guy.
That's the other thing I think people forget too, especially when you talk about folklore or legends or, you know, people like Rasputin. All of them are just people, and plenty of them, they might be famous or doing something crazy that's been talked about for generations, but some of them are jerks. You know, they're like, they're not good humans, even if you take all that other stuff away.
He could be the deal with the devil guy for sure. I mean, he abandoned his family. He allegedly raped a lot of women. You know, he was very aggressive sexually.
Yeah.
And he seemed to have no moral compass. There's nothing he wouldn't, I think he was capable of doing almost anything.
Quick aside, have either one of you seen The King's Man, the sequel to the Kingsman movie?
Oh, yes.
Okay. Well, so there's an actor in that movie. His name is Rhys Ifans. I'm not sure how you pronounce his last name. Ifans.
Yeah, he's been a lot.
He plays Rasputin in it, and so I don't know if you saw Kingsman, the first one, which was a lot.
One.
You know, it's like a kind of a British Secret Service kind of thing.
I saw that one.
So this is the follow-up, but it's also kind of a prequel thing because it takes place in 1902, and that guy Rhys plays Rasputin, and he is unbelievable. And there is a fight sequence that is just one of the best I've ever seen in a movie, and it's Rasputin, and he's doing all this magical, crazy crap. It is like, but it plays into like, it's funny because you watch that or you see that character in that movie, and you're like, this is ridiculous. Yeah. And then I'm listening to your episode on Rasputin from 2017. And I was like, it's actually weirder than it was in the movie. I mean, the stuff in the movie was not only was that all true, but it's even stranger, the reality of that guy.
He was so strange. He was so intense. There was some kind of weird energy around him. Many, many people spoke to that. His eyes were very hypnotic. Yeah. He was a cretin. He would just do stuff like pick his nose and eat it at like a royal dinner. Yeah. He stunk horrifically. He rarely bathed. He's having sex all the time. I mean, God knows how many venereal diseases he may have had.
Yeah.
You know, and he was high a lot of the time. You know, some of his quote unquote faith healing with like the Romanovs, well, he was supplying Nicholas, the Tsar, with cocaine, morphine, and opium, you know, to take his pain away. But they didn't know what that stuff truly was back then. So it's like, you know, he became this drug dealer, but to them, he could be perceived as like folk medicine. And why do you make me feel so good when my doctors can't? And he was a mix of a lot of things. I think, you know, he's on a lot of drugs. He morally bankrupt, but there also was this weird X factor where maybe he sold his soul to some kind of demon or something. I mean, God, it seems possible.
Yeah.
On that note, dialing the woo meter all the way to the right or the left. I don't pick your end on one end of the scale on the radio dial.
11.
11. Going up to 11. It's like he's been mentioned several times, and I think some Ancient Aliens episodes. And one clip I just recently saw was talking about not necessarily alien, but like external, existentially threatening beings that are non-human coming or being involved in Earth matters to influence us and steer things as they sometimes do. And it's not always good. I believe there are good influences and good people who kind of by hook or by crook or whatever their intent are the angels that kind of steer us towards good, or sometimes are involved in miracles. And then sometimes, of course, with the balance of the universe, is that they're sometimes not good. And the supposition or wondering is that, was he, not saying that he's not human, but is he influenced in some way by some non-human force? Because now he's involved in world politics from a very unlikely and impossible outside route. Somehow, like, as people know, he was a peasant. They don't mix with the upper class. You're the furthest
Siberian
thing from
peasant.
them.
Yeah.
Siberian peasant. And the fact that he was so just physically and personally repulsive, but it didn't matter that he had such pull. And so your story there talking about when you mentioned that couple at the Rainbow, it instantly made me think of an anecdote that I read in Strange Intruders by David Weatherly. And he talks about energy vampires, which you were talking about as well. And I think you can take it away or give it to people as well.
Yeah.
You can reverse the flow. But in Rasputin's thing, it's like, how do you hook people? Is that, well, you can't be all evil. Eventually, like, people don't like that. And they will, as you'll meet the same end eventually, or just be shunned. So you're not effective for what you're trying to influence.
Yeah.
So you do a bunch of good acts, and then that gets people on your side. It's like, well, he healed my farm animals, or they were sick, or the cow wasn't producing milk, and he was able to cure it. He healed my son, whatever it is. That gets you in, and then you're able to do even more dastardly deeds. But this one anecdote, because it reminded me also that a young woman was at a New York nightclub with a group of friends, and this other group of friends had this other, and I always wonder about this too, like, how do people meet these kind of people? She was with this other group of friends that had a stranger with them, or it's like, oh, this is so-and-so friend, and she's visiting. She was, young, or, in her 30s, demure Japanese woman, and just kind of quiet. But the woman who's telling the anecdote said there's just something off about her. Like, I know she had a bucket hat pulled over, but like you couldn't see her face very well, even though she's 5 feet away. There's just something not right about her. And so she was mesmerized, and she couldn't take her
focus. Remember that Woody Allen movie where he was out of focus?
The DP.
He was the only one.
The director of photography is right. The worst thing that could happen to you.
Yeah.
But there was something about her that just keyed her off. And then there's the other chilling part. It's like the people that you met at the Rainbow, or Paula Pell. The other person notices that you notice them. They now know, oh, you're feeling
because that is what happened in Paula's story. Did the couple that came down the stairs, they look you in the eye? Did the guy look you in the eye?
Yes.
Yeah. I couldn't remember.
They know, they're aware of the effect that you have on them, and they use that to their advantage, much like Rasputin. But finally, the young Japanese woman, and I mention that because, often we perceive them as being demure and genteel. And she's like the person you should not be fearing out of that whole group in a New York nightclub,
totally.
in the morning. And so the Japanese woman notices the effect she's having, like this, she can't stop focusing on her. And she gives this really kind of creepy, sick smile. And then she reaches out and just with her index, like, pokes her or touches her in her midsection, her stomach. And she instantly felt like she was going to collapse. Like, she felt all the energy just kind of drain out of her. And she was woozy and like just had to leave. And the other she kind of grinned and giggled, the Japanese woman. It's like, I got to go. Like, something happened here. I got to go. And she was like really ill for the next 3 days.
So
strange. And just drained of energy. So I do believe that they're, I don't know the people telling the story.
They walk among us.
Well, there are energy type vampires.
Yeah.
They can either do it through talk, or just being around you, or by touch, but they are aware.
Maybe
of
she
the
was a
effect they
master
have.
in dim mak. Death point striking.
That's a 5-finger death.
Yeah, like the
grip.
the palm exploding.
Yeah,
heart.
that requires multiple acupressure points. But the thing is that there's something like that, and we do bringing it back to Rasputin. It's like, I'm sure there was, because he also touched people. There's something about touch, the mesmerism with the eyes. That's also a big thing about being able to affect that just with the gaze, with the focus of the eyes.
And you said pivotal moment, like what if there were these kind of beings sent in to kind of like steer the earth in different directions? If we're going to follow that theory, that possibility with Rasputin, I mean, the effect he had on world history, modern history, is immense. Where the Romanov family, I think they had been around 3 centuries in power. There was another family that was for more centuries before that. They've been in power for a long time. Mm-hmm. And towards the end of the Romanovs' reign, things weren't, going well. Russia wasn't doing so well in some wars and things. However, if you remove Rasputin from the Romanov family, do they still get killed? Do the Bolsheviks still win their revolution? And there are arguments that they don't. And obviously, like the Bolshevik Revolution, in Russia following World War I changed the history of the world dramatically. I mean, there would be no Cold War. There would be no Stalin. Also, I mean, Hitler may have won World War II if it wasn't for the power of Soviet Russia being able to stop him on the, the Eastern Front there. So it's crazy to think about how the world might look today if you just literally remove that one person.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Some folks with knowledgeable about history may know, like the English around World War I were not happy with the Russians' position and them, possibly being removed from World War I or not fighting. And they weren't doing, like you said, they weren't doing well.
No.
Russia as a country was starving.
Yeah.
And there's a change that needed to happen. Had Nicholas the Tsar still been in power, as weak of a leader as he is, it would have changed the course of history, most likely.
Yeah.
So now you come in, you have somebody that comes in as a catalyst for this massive change, and world events change. And so was that the purpose, or had Rasputin's personality, or if he just played his cards better and stayed in power, could it have been even greater change, or for something that was more nefarious?
Right. Yeah, he's a very unique historical person. I was trying to think, even as you're talking, I'm like, of somebody similar to Rasputin, somebody who had so much influence out of nowhere, somebody who shouldn't have been there. I mean, maybe there were some people in the courts of various Roman emperors, possibly historical figures lost somewhat to history. I don't know. I can't think of a comparative
as
person.
A solid person, there's been tons of stories, though, of interference, you could say, or just nudging. I think even George Washington claimed there was an apparition that appeared to him and gave some guidance or encouragement, because if you look at it, again, these impossible things, like America should not have won the Revolutionary War.
Correct.
The numbers were not there for them to have the effect that they did. And so it was very unlikely that we would come out as winners and a country from that and not get taken over once then, and also in 1812. So there's history's full of these stories where somebody was, Lincoln had visions.
Yeah.
Everybody's, has this kind of spiritual or otherworldly presence where something comes in, and it's some kind of, it could be a lucid dream, it could be an apparition or a vision of a being that kind of nudges them along in a good or bad way.
Right.
And usually often the story you hear, it's for the good. It's like, hey, you need to do this. And then they have the confidence to go do or follow directions, and it changes the course of history. So that's kind of the idea I was getting at, is that there is a larger influence that is not strictly human or just people's imaginations. I think we are influenced in some way and steered here and there.
Yeah, it makes me think in the best of ways about like the smoking man from the X-Files, which was one of my favorite shows growing up. But, but these players behind the scenes that are possibly steering, world events, which, I'm very open to that possibility. It makes me think of, following like the first detonations of the atomic bomb. It wasn't very long after that all of a sudden so many UFO sightings all over the place where it's like, did we get some people's attention? Did they have to come down more in a show of bigger force to kind of steer things in a better direction to keep us from annihilating ourselves? I don't know.
Yeah. Well, speaking of X-Files, there is that one episode I remember, the woman who I think Mulder starts to see her in all these historical photos standing behind all the great world leaders. And she says, well, I was offered a 3 wishes, and I wished for a sack of turnips initially, because we were starving, so I thought like a never-ending sack of turnips would be the answer. But then you're kind of immortal, and then you're influencing people. Same thing when we covered Saint Germain, where he's now got the ear of all the most important people, because he's such a charismatic figure, but more for the good. He's very reserved personally. That's one of the things. Nobody ever really saw him eat when he had these large dinner parties, except a gruel he would eat. And so he was much more reserved, but he did seem to show up and start influencing people in a more subtle way. So you do wonder about, that's the more dramatic part of it, where the person who's immortal, and just kind of like showing up throughout history. And if you have enough time and influence, the secret empire you could build with your influence. Of just getting to know people. And I do think that there are influences. I don't know, who or what or when, but I was just noticing there are tons of stories like that where you have to dig, because that's not in the usual history books, but like somebody will have had a vision, or they saw somebody, or it's Alexander the Great down to Lincoln. And I'm sure it still continues where people are like, I was going to do this. And then I just had a thought in my head and I decided to, rule the other way.
Charisma itself is such an interesting just characteristic. It made me think of like, Dungeons and Dragons, where it's like, you come up with your character and you roll for charisma and stuff. But like, then that just led me to thinking like, what an odd attribute that is. Like, what even is that? Why do some people have this hypnotic sway of others that is intangible? Like, could charisma itself have some sort of supernatural aspect?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Yeah, that we don't understand yet. Because like, why are some people... And I've heard that about some politicians. I don't want to get, polarizing now, but I've heard about like some politicians that, a lot of people hate and a lot of people like.
Yeah.
And then you hear these stories about like so-and-so hates them, but then they get into the room with them and they feel almost hypnotized.
I met Bill Clinton a long time ago.
Oh, I've heard he's one of them, like wildly charismatic.
It was, all I did was shake his hand, but like it was, you could sense it like coming off of him.
What is that?
It's wild. I don't know. And again, through my wife, because I went to the whole time she was at SNL, I of course went to everything. And I met a lot of people that were like that because they rise to the top when they're actors or whatever.
What a power they have.
Yeah, it's really wild.
You can be trained or learned. It just it reminded me of my friend John. He's taught English in Japan and Taiwan for 30, 40 years now. And I think this is when he was in Taiwan, and he's not a woo-woo guy. He's not. He's mildly interested, but he did go to an exhibition in this park, I believe, in Taiwan, where Tai Chi Master was going to be there, and he it's like, oh, everybody's heard of this guy, all the locals, and it's like, okay, he's just going to give a talk and be there. So I think he had a friend who showed him, was able to introduce him, and he didn't really know, like I said, much about. He doesn't practice Tai Chi, but he went up and I think he was introduced to this guy. I think without even touching him, he said you could just feel what the Asian world would call ki, or in martial arts you call it ki or chi. It's that energy, and for the good. He said like you just felt like, whoa, I just got a charge of like positive energy from this guy. Like he's just radiating it, and that is from his practice and being a master and cultivating it, and I'm sure learning some ancient techniques.
I mean, I've done Tai Chi a little bit, but nothing like to that spiritual level. But that reminds me too of like, I've never done this, but my wife has. She's more open to this stuff than I've been historically. Reiki, like the Reiki massage, where you're not being touched. And she has told me the craziest stories of like feeling like you're not touched, but you feel this type of energy. You feel something in the room in moments. The person practicing it on you, they feel something. I had an experience where I was not feeling this, but like it was a very intense experience. I did that toad venom, that bufo, that.
Oh, you did what? You did that?
Yeah, the God molecule, that really powerful psychedelic. I like psychedelics, but I've only done that one once.
Yeah,
and it was the most intense experience I've ever had in my life, where it felt like I was dying, like I was out in space, but like such a powerful feeling. And I felt like I purged all these negative blocks, these emotions. And the guy who gave it to me was kind of a practitioner in some of that stuff and would help people with PTSD and other things. Not that I had that, but like, he goes, I don't know where you went, but he goes, I felt this negative energy blast off of you that was so powerful it pushed me back against the wall. I mean, I didn't see him experience that.
Yeah.
But I certainly felt different. And I'm like, how? What is that? Where does that come from?
Forrest and Scott thank you for supporting their sponsors. I'm Keely. Now back to the show.
I was going to save this story, but as I was mentioning to you, Dan, before we started rolling, yesterday I went to the Rhine Institute here in Durham, North Carolina, which is the organization that started out as part of Duke University studying parapsychology. By the way, the Rhine's daughter,
J.V. Rhine and...
their daughter, I can't remember her first name. It might be Sally. Her last name is Feather. She's still with us, 95.
Wow.
And still with us.
That's
by the
amazing.
Way. So I didn't meet her, but there were other folks there were talking about maybe interviewing her soon. But anyway, so I'm there and I got a tour of the facility from the current managing director, who I think has been there 15 years at this point, maybe longer. And he does scientific experiments there at the Rhine. And he's been doing a study, I think, for several years, 7, 8, maybe more. And it involves hundreds of subjects coming into the Rhine. And he has a room that I went in yesterday called the Double Dark Room. And so the walls are painted black. The door has special plates on it so that when it's closed, no light can come in. And then on top of that, the room outside of it, whenever somebody's in the double dark room and he's trying to go to total blackness, they shut the light off in the room outside and shut that door as well. And so it becomes a very, 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 very dark room.
Yeah.
I took a picture of it. It's all black. So but he was like, this is my favorite part of the tour. I want to tell you about the study I've been doing. Duke University, they talk to each other. It's right there in town. And, in Chapel Hill, which is not very far away, like 20 minutes. Some folks were doing a medical study to try, and I think it was to identify, and I'll get the real story from this gentleman. His name's John G. Kruth, by the way, Kruth. I think they were, these two, at least a couple of guys, researchers at Duke, were working to try and come up with an easy way to identify the presence, I think, of muscular dystrophy. Huh. And somehow it involved light. And so these guys had done this whole big study and they had all this gear. And then like before they finished it, some other really simple test came out and it just nullified all the work they'd been doing, which, this happens inside. They weren't, they were just like, all right, well, we're going to move on to something else. But they brought the gear and they were like, we should take this over to Rhine. So they took this gear and they gave it to the Rhine Institute and they were like, you should study healers. And I'm bringing this up because we have naturally segued into Reiki and stuff like that here a minute ago. So in this room that I was in, there was an infrared camera, Hughes manufactured, like a very sophisticated infrared camera. And then in addition to that, like an engineer would use somewhere. And then a thing called a biopack, which is in the medical practice, it's, it's for measuring electromagnetic energy on your own body. It's like a hospital thing. It's not like a woo-woo thing, Scientology thing. It's like a real life medical gear. Yeah. And then a photon sensor. And this was the coolest thing. I can't remember what the actual name for this thing was. I took a picture of it. It's like a metal box. If you looked at it, you wouldn't have any. It looks like the little black robot from Star Wars, but it's just a box with things on it, and it has a little aperture. And this thing can sense as little as 1 photon of light.
Oh my God.
So what he has been doing is rounding up healers, people who say that they're healers, and remote healers, Reiki, Qigong, I think it is, if I'm saying that right, all the different kinds, as well as martial artists, senseis who have a high degree of aptitude in their martial art, and bringing them into this room, turning off all the lights, turning on the photon sensor and the infrared camera, and then asking them to do their thing. Mm-hmm. And what he has found, categorically with proof, I mean, this blew my mind when he told me this, was that these folks, he goes, and it's only about 10% of them. 90% of people, nothing happening. And it was so fascinating too. He said, first of all, we all glow a little bit. So a person goes in this room, no matter who you are, 4 or 5 photons will be detected in the pitch black coming off of a human body. He said, if someone eats shrimp for lunch, he has to know what they've had because shrimp glow. And he goes, he had a person come in once who had shrimp, and when they opened their mouth, like all these photons came out.
Whoa.
So it's like and then another person came wearing a sweater that had been washed in phosphates, and the person had to take the sweater off and go back in. So it's all this like different things that he's doing. And he's being very scientific about the results. And, because the Rhine Institute, they study this stuff that's out there, but they do it in a very scientific way. That's their whole goal. And so what he said was about 10% of these folks who claim to be, or didn't claim to be, who like people who were healers, or in some cases maybe claim to be healers, or martial artists who obviously are definitely masters of their art. Yeah. When they would get in this dark room and the lights were off and they would do their thing, they would emit light. Are you ready for this? From their palms.
What?
Both of their hands and up here in your
like
forehead where people say the third eye is. Yes. Yeah. Photons were coming. He has recorded this in numerous individuals. And he was like, it is a consistent thing. And somehow they are emitting focused light from their bodies. So
is it shooting out too, like a Street Fighter 2 thing?
I didn't ask that. I was so slack-jawed. I didn't ask the right questions.
Hadouken.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Or Iron Man. Like, I don't, it's just like, but whatever it is, they were really doing this. And he said some folks, only a very much, much, much smaller percentage of the people who could do this were like off the charts, like 16 million photons like coming out of them when they were doing their thing.
To clarify, so you're saying they're doing this in a completely pitch black room.
I actually asked to sit in there with it off for a little time, and they did it. I sat in there for like 10 minutes, and
it freaked you out.
Yeah, it's I didn't melt down or anything. I was very calm. So I was wearing my like super white, I have these really like flat white, they're not Converse, they're Nikes, but just like, they're the nice, like really flat, almost like Chucks or low top Chucks.
Mm-hmm.
And they're super white leather, with just a gold swoop on them. And they were so bright. I was like, I know I'm going to be able to see these a little bit. And I couldn't see them on my feet. I put my hand in front of my face. Like literally I was going back and forth with it inches away from my face. I could feel the wind. I could feel the heat from my hand.
Whoa.
Couldn't see it. So that's how dark it is.
But for clarification, another person in that room would not be able to see the light coming from the third eye and the two palms.
The infrared camera picks it up.
Right.
It's not in the visible spectrum.
Okay, that's the question. So
sorry, I should have said that.
Just
not in the visible spectrum.
Photons are being detected and measured and tracked, but somebody else in there would not be able to see it. It's an invisible force.
Exactly.
But still, there is a measurement of the very basic building block of light, a photon emitted.
Yeah.
Was he able to detect any other kind of electromagnetic or any kind of other energy or force?
This experiment was very focused on one thing, which I think they always kind of are. But he did suggest, or during the course of explaining the stuff to us, we were talking a little bit about electromagnetic energy and EMP meters that ghost hunters use and all that stuff. And he said people do emit that, but it's like you have to get sensors literally in contact with the skin to measure it.
Yeah.
Because it does not come off of people. And so,
is it connected to Kirlian photography?
No, it's not. And it's funny you should mention that because our friend Dan, I don't know if you know who she is, but this is a woman I was talking about earlier. Her name's Allison Jornlin. She owns a ghost walk company with her brother and has been on our show several times. That was her next question. Did it have anything to do with Kirlian photography? And he said, no, it's completely unrelated. And on top of that, Kirlian photography he explained it actually. He was like, it's basically just science. He explained how it worked. It's not like the famous photo of the leaf that you can still see they took half the leaf away between the two plates and you can still see it. And everyone's like, oh, it's an outline of the leaf's existence. And he was like, it was moisture from the leaf that was still in the plates. And so he explained, he was like, we studied that. It's not a thing. It's really cool. He goes, makes great art and all that. Right. But he was like, but that's entirely unrelated to what we were just talking about.
Just quickly for folks and using the AI assist here, just and bringing it back to Soviet Russia.
Yeah. Yes.
Just a brief explanation here. So Kirlian photography is a technique that captures images of electrical coronal discharges around objects, often creating a glowing effect that resembles an aura. It was discovered in 1939 by Soviet scientist Semyon Kirlian when he connected an object to a high voltage source and placed it on a photographic plate. So I'm sure a lot of people will talk about the opening of the X-Files. One of the images that comes in the montage, that's a Kirlian. So people, as we know, we generate electricity. You're seeing a little bit of that, even though it's invisible, but it has some kind of effect. And so then you wonder if it's all connected. But what he's saying is that it's not connected in that way because this is a different force.
Yeah, there's no connection to Kirlian photography. And on top of that, he seemed to be saying that's actually a natural process. There's not a supernatural or paranormal process, which he explained, and I can't do it. We'll have him on the show, and maybe he can explain it. But he said the next thing he wants to do with the study is they have another room there, and he wants to bring the person being healed, put them in the other room, and then have the healer be, this martial arts wouldn't necessarily do this, but I don't know, maybe if somebody wanted to punch someone from another room, but like
that can happen.
But because he has another photon detector, put another one in the other room and see if the light is actually traveling to the other person. Because as you know, anybody knows because I've actually had folks, because we have friends that practice Reiki and I've had them do sessions on me from many states away. So like, how does that work?
It's the same, Scott, but it's the same principle as, I'll say it here, and Dan can take a drink. Remote viewing. Yeah. That's one of our old chestnut bugaboo words here. But there's no
some people get so mad when you say
generally time or space, because I think it depends on what you're doing. It's like, why could, of course, Rasputin wanted to travel that distance, be in the court, and because he's a very physical guy. But you could do the healing remotely, as with Reiki. Or you could do the laying on of hands, because I think that's a direct transfer where it's more effective. So there's something also about the touch. And there, as we know, but that's what Kirlian photography is suggesting. There is a physical thing that's very close and very localized. So I do think there's two different things, but there's no time or space does not matter, I think, in some of these kind of connections. Yeah. And some of the weirdest stories I'm sure, Dan, you come across where, well, one that we were talking about earlier about spirituality and spiritism and spiritualism do different things in that when we covered the Watsika Wonder, there were things that you were talking about cold reading and the young girl, Lurency Venom, who was the young girl who claimed to have been possessed or had knowledge of this other younger girl in, one of her peers. She knew things that could not be picked up by cold reading. And so she was claiming that, no, the spirit of this other girl is telling me these things. And the psychologists at the time, talking about William James, the father of American psychology.
Oh, yeah.
What they were claiming was that, no, I don't think it's this other spirit giving the words, but what it is psychic ability. What we found fascinating is that they didn't really want to believe in spirits inhabiting people and informing you through some kind of connection, but they were believing in and wholeheartedly behind psychic ability. And she's picking it up from your mind subconsciously. You're not even realizing you're giving her the answers. So I thought that was fascinating, but there was no time or space with that either. It's all that Akashic record. So, but before I forget, speaking of, have either of you two known anybody that could see auras? And my follow-up question, Mr. Cummins, is has your wife seen or experienced anything strange?
I mean, I've read about, people who, like talk about, being able to see auras and that stuff. I've had conversations with people I've just met, like fans and stuff, who they have claimed to be able to see auras. I can't even remember what they said that my aura was. I've been around that. I've never been around somebody I've known well who claims to have that ability. And then with my wife, as far as paranormal experiences, I don't think she's had something as mechanical, for lack of a better term, as I said, like with the bathroom and stuff, but she has definitely had some experiences when she was younger around like Ouija boards, where some very strange messages came through that she doesn't understand how anybody playing the game could have known that message.
Right.
Yeah.
Like there was a relative that died, right before she had played one game, and the things that came through freaked her out to the point that she won't ever mess around with one of those again.
That's a good call.
Yeah. So she's.
We've covered a few Ouija stories that are just. It's like let's let's take this out of the equation. Yeah.
So she's had a number of those things. She's had things happen around her that she is convinced is a message from the ghost of so and so. So she's very, very, very much a believer.
Have you read, or has she read Siren Call of the Hungry Ghost? Have you read that book?
I haven't. I don't think she has either.
Find it.
Okay, I'm gonna write it down.
Find it. It's amazing. It'll freak you out because that's the one that taught us never to trust what you're talking to.
We've done a number of those stories, that we've just found online where it's like, I mean, I don't want them to be true because they're horrific.
So that was my next question, by the way. You've been so generous with your time. And,
no,
I
thanks.
don't want to keep you too much longer, but like I want to know for you, as we said at the top of the show, you've done easily, almost 170 more episodes than we have just of your regular show, not to mention the other ones and the bonus shows and all that stuff. You're so prolific. But my question to you is, people ask us this sometimes, and I'm curious with you because I'm not familiar with your entire catalog.
Oh, of course not.
What is the thing that has stuck with you the most or that changed your outlook?
I don't think anything will ever trump this for me. Yeah. It was such a powerful story for me, and it definitely pivoted me from being skeptical of this world but fascinated to still fascinated but a believer. And it's the story of Teresita Basa. I don't know if you're familiar. Okay,
no, I know
shaking his head.
I don't know why. I don't know why I know it, though.
It's funny. There's not. You can find through newspapers.com, you can find old newspaper articles about it. You can find a couple journalism pieces, but not a lot actually, which is interesting to me because it is such a fascinating story. The cliff notes of this story is that this woman comes over from the Philippines to Chicago, I believe in the 70s. I mean, it's been a while since I've looked at the source material, but I know that the core elements I'm getting correct here. She has a background in music. She was a gifted pianist, comes over, can't find a career for herself in music, but ends up getting a nursing degree, and she works at this hospital in Chicago. So while she's working at this hospital in Chicago, she's in her 40s, I believe now. She's teaching piano lessons on the side. So she does have people that she doesn't know coming in and out of her apartment in this high rise she lives in to receive these lessons. Well, one day she gets murdered. They weren't broken in, so it was somebody she knew or she was given a lesson to. And there's signs of possibly a sexual assault, the way the body was staged. And I say staged because it turns out it was. She's found nude. Somebody had piled some stuff on top of her. They had burned those things to maybe mask what had really happened.
Oh, see, I think I've heard.
We did talk about this, Scott. And but we'll let Dan finish here. But it involves a court case.
Please do.
Yes. It's a crazy story where the police have zero leads. She was very well liked. She lived alone, no known enemies, no known altercations with anybody, nothing.
I remember the story.
Okay.
Now. Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Oh, but please keep going.
It's so
Yes,
good.
yes.
Where a month or two go by and the case is dead. They don't know if things were stolen or not. They don't even know for sure if she was sexually assaulted. They have no suspects whatsoever. And then the two detectives that were assigned this case get a call from the captain of another precinct who's like, hey, so-and-so is claiming they have information on the Teresita Basa case. I think you should go talk to them. Well, this person is a doctor at another hospital. So they go to talk to this doctor. The doctor, his wife, randomly, also is Filipino, but didn't know Teresita personally. But it turns out, just for full disclosure, they took an orientation course together at the hospital like years before, but don't stay in touch.
Right. So they've been in each other's presence
They've
once.
been in each other's presence one time for a few days, never since.
Yeah.
And this doctor, I guess he asked the investigators, the first thing he says is, do you believe in ghosts? And the one officer later said in some articles, by like the Boston Globe and the Chicago Tribune and some interviews, at that time, he's thinking, great, I have wasted my time. This guy's a quack. This is going to go nowhere.
Yeah.
But he's already there. He has no lead. So he's like, I'll hear him out. Well, this doctor tells him that a few weeks before, his wife woke him up in the middle of the night. His wife, also Filipino, also a nurse, wakes him up in the middle of the night and is in a trance-like state and is speaking in a voice unfamiliar to him and is claiming to be somebody else. Is claiming to be Teresita Basa, but he doesn't know who that is.
Right.
Is just claiming to be this woman who was murdered and is urging him to go to the police, tell them so-and-so did it. You have to help me. My death has to be avenged kind of thing. Well, he just thinks his wife is having a very weird lucid dream. And he, of course, does not call the police. He talks to her about it the next day. She doesn't remember it. Whatever, goes about their lives. About a week later, trance-like state again. And now his wife in this other personality, the Teresita Basa, is angry. Why didn't you call the police? And so he thinks he's just kind of humoring her in this state. And he's like, well, I can't just call the police because my wife has a dream and gives me a name. I have to have more details. Well, now his wife, who, again, there's no way she should know any of this, tells him who murdered her, how they got in. They were actually coming to like supposedly fix her TV.
Right.
It's this other nurse from the hospital who the police were not looking at all, says this guy stole some of her jewelry that came from the Philippines that you would not find in Chicago, tells him who has the jewelry. His girlfriend is wearing it at that moment, gives him the names and numbers of her friends that can verify that this jewelry was in fact Teresita Basa's, did come from the Philippines. They're so amazed by the level of detail, they decide, why not just check this out a little bit? They go and they interview this guy's girlfriend, the guy who supposedly killed her. Sure enough, she is wearing the jewelry exactly as was described. They're like, oh my God. They call some of these numbers. These people verify, yep, that was Teresita Basa's jewelry. The names match the number. Yeah. Then they interview the guy and they just read him, hey, you came into her apartment. You were supposed to fix this. You killed her, blah, blah, blah. He is so shocked that they know so many things they shouldn't know that he confesses it was him. He did steal those things. And then the story takes a final weird turn where they go through the trial. Some stupid technicality gets this guy off and there's a mistrial. So now it looks like he can finally get away with it after all this. Very next day, he confesses everything all over again. And the story was that her ghost appeared to him in his cell and made it very clear to him that she was going to terrorize him for the rest of his days unless he confessed to what he did. The officers, they're talking about this. This is back in the 70s. They're like, this does not help our careers to say that a ghost helped us solve this case. It makes us, other officers are going to make fun of us. We don't want this to be the reason this case gets solved. How else can you explain it? And I read all the old source articles and I just walked away from that story thinking there is no other explanation than a ghost.
Right, because for you, so what you're saying is what changed your mind or made you more of a believer is the fact that it was documented and it's with police reports and part of the court case it came out. Because we do now remember that story because we had talked about other instances where supposedly a ghost had helped or influenced a court trial.
Yeah. There's other cases.
There's other cases where it was kind of documented, and I can't remember the first one where I'm not sure if it may have had to do. So, I think we came across that in the Somerton Man. It was one of the people involved in that trial, I believe, and I may be getting this wrong. It wasn't tied to the Somerton Man, that disappearance. It was another case that they had some connection with where some evidence was presented that nobody could have known. And it was claimed that a ghost had delivered the information to make the conviction. So I don't know if you come across any police officers or psychics much in your travels there, but the ones that we have, at least to me, it is said that, if we get desperate, we're in a bind at a dead end here, we will consult a psychic, and we have some very good ones, but they just don't tell anybody about it because, of course, of the reaction.
Yep.
And psychics will tell you that, like, oh yeah, I get consulted a lot. And, it's not always the open and shut case like this, where what's remarkable about the Teresita story is that it's so detailed and it was so forceful. Usually the things are vague. It's like, I'm in a field underneath a walkway and there's water there. You get, the way that I understand that, some psychics get their images and feelings. It can be a little vague, but it narrows it down. It gives you a lead where you didn't have before. And now there's a dedicated streaming channel of just those psychics in court cases where they've come through. And like you said, it's just at some point, the police officers with every interview, it's like, I didn't really, when they first started, I didn't believe in any of this at all. And I can't deny the information we got. There's no way this could have happened.
That reminds me, and I can't remember if it's an Unsolved Mysteries or something. There was of the psychic who managed to stab a suspect while he was driving, in the chest or whatever, and he felt it and ran off the road.
That's amazing.
Well, I feel like that was an Unsolved Mystery.
Well, now you're talking about Men Who Stare at Goats and Project Stargate, where you could manipulate and Russian. The Russians
George
were working
Clooney
on
making
this.
That face.
Well, you can manipulate. I think there was one Russian PK adherent, I guess you could say, telekinesis there, that they apparently could stop the heart of a small animal. Or just give it arrhythmias where you could kill it with a heart attack. And so,
my God,
that's the stories that the Russians, because that's what we found as well that is kind of surprising, is that the Americans, with our cultural background and our with some of our religious beliefs, we tend not to want to put any stock in that. But the Russians are like, nah, hey, if it works, it works. We're going to try it out, and we're going to see if it does work, and we're going to find the people that claim to can do this, and we're going to test them. And then through some espionage, the Americans find out, like, hey, they seem to be getting some results, and they're really into this. Now we should try this. And so they have to do that more surreptitiously, because, of course, you still get, we still to this day, it's one of the most contested subjects we ever covered is psychic ability. And so you can't really tell people that you're doing it and what the results you get, because even then when it comes out, it's like, they did a study and it's ineffective. And then you find out later, even that's even what the Stanford Research Institute and what they were doing with Stargate, is that the person, they said, well, it's, speaking of aspirin, tying it back in, the efficacy is greater than the effect of aspirin.
Wow.
As a drug. So it's like, okay, that's just raw scientific data.
What
they don't like is the implication of that data. Well, what do you mean then? Does that mean this is all real and there are psychic spies? And it's like, well, some countries believe so. At least the Russians do.
Yeah. This is what I love, this whole world, is it gives me the feeling I had when I was a kid, a teenager, watching X-Files, but better, because these are real stories.
Yeah.
Not things, from a writer's room. It's just, I just love all the mystery it makes me think of. And, if one of these things is true, we say that a lot on Scared to Death. There just has to be one of these things to be true.
Right.
And it opens up an entire giant Pandora's box of mystery, which it just makes me so excited to be alive and be able to explore it.
Yeah. But so for people that want to hear your Teresita Bassa episode, which show is that? Do you remember? Or?
That was a Scared to Death episode. And I had to make myself a little episode list to keep track of everything so we don't duplicate stuff.
Yeah, that's what we have to do too.
It was, let's see, Teresita Bassa was episode 88.
Episode 88 of Scared to Death. So folks you should find that. By the way, folks should find Timesuck in general. If you haven't already heard of it, as we said, Dan and Lindsay's shows are very successful. He's doing us a favor by
you guys
on
are
our show.
no.
So, we really appreciate it. And I'm not trying to wrap this up, but originally we were told that you had an hour, and it's been 95 minutes. So I want to give you an opportunity to say goodbye. But also, where can people find your shows? What should they be looking out for?
If they go to badmagicproductions.com, that links to everything I have. Timesuck, Scared to Death, or they can just throw my name, Dan Cummins, into Google, and these things will come up.
Great. Great. Well, Dan, thank you so much for coming on
thank
the show.
you for
And
taking the time.
I hope that I think I speak for Forrest. We both would have you back anytime.
Oh yeah, please let us know what you're up to and your next strange paranormal bathroom experience. Anything? Come on. And
no.
Well, I love that we both have paranormal bathroom experiences. Yeah.
Lindsay and I have been big fans of you guys since we started doing Scared to Death. And
great.
You're just genuine. We always tell our listeners, like just good, genuine people. I am pretty skeptical with people in general. And, entertainment is, as you guys know, it's a weird business and there's a lot of weird motivations out there. Oh, yeah. And, I just like talking about energy. I've always just liked your guys' energy. Just
well, thank you.
Yeah,
right back.
Really good guys.
Yeah.
No, thanks, Dan. It's like I said, I think it's a big community of folks, all with different talents and outlooks, and from skeptical to full-on believer. That's what makes it special here. Is that we all, no matter what you believe or what your temperament is that you have an interest in this, and that kind of connects us all. And I think it's like, it's a special group. But we've listened to your show for a long time now, and again, just the energy of it and the way you present it, and it's very refreshing from what is from what we do and what's usually out there. So, thank you for producing all these years, and we hope you keep up with it. And no matter
likewise,
where this steers.
Yeah, hopefully it'll work out. Hopefully you'll get committed and maybe really dive into it.
Thank you guys very much.
That's going to wrap up episode 306 of Astonishing Legends. We'll be back with a new episode next week. Look for new episodes of the Dead Letter Office weekly on Tuesdays.
Astonishing Legends is edited by Sarah Voorhees-Wendell at VW Sound. Our co-producer is Tess Feifel, who also leads our research efforts and manages our social media. And we're grateful for the hard work of our technical producer, Ed Vicola, behind the scenes. Special thanks to our announcer, John Boland, for lending his voice to our shows.
Hi, I'm Jenna,
and I give permission to Astonishing Legends to use my voice however they see fit, galaxy-wide in perpetuity.
Our theme, which is available as a ringtone, was composed by Judson Crane at foundermusic.com. All other music and sound design for the show is composed and created by Alan Carestia.
Our logo was created by Tommy Beaver Design, and our animated graphics for social media and YouTube are done by Joshua Sloan at deadstreetproductions.com.
Many episodes have transcripts available. For ones that don't, you can request them by emailing transcripts@astonishinglegends.com.
Astonishing Legends would not be possible without you, our listeners. Visit our store at astonishinglegends.com or interact with us and other listeners on Facebook, Instagram, Blue Sky, Discord, and YouTube.
You can also visit us at patreon.com/astonishinglegends, where patrons have access to commercial-free versions of both the main show and the Dead Letter Office, as well as additional bonus content, including the Patreon-exclusive show, The Astonishing Junk Drawer. No part of this show may be reproduced anywhere without permission. Copyright Astonishing Legends Productions.
Good night.